I extend my warm welcome to all present here for the day 5 of week 2 of third edition of India Gaming Show and Conference 2021 being organized by CII in association with Indian Digital Gaming Society and supported by the Department of Science and Technology, Department of Electronics and IT, and Department of Information and Broadcasting, Government of India. The theme of the third edition of India Gaming Show and Conference 2021 is Gaming for Good, Build in India, Build for the World. The conference, along with the show, is being hosted on the CII Hive digital platform, a dedicated multi-feature virtual online platform with a 24/7 help desk and a digital B2B lounge. Before we begin today's program, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our partners, Google, Western Digital, Jet Synthesis Private Limited, Scientific Games, Hangama Games, Nodwin Gaming, Asus, Critical X Exports, Game.tv, and our content partner, KPMG, for extending their support. Participants are attending this session both through CII, Hive, and YouTube. I would request all the participants to kindly visit the virtual exhibition at the CII Hive anytime today if you've not visited so far. So before we begin with our first session, I would request all the speakers to kindly keep their mics on mute and unmute while speaking. The first session for the day is an interesting panel discussion with very eminent subject matter experts who are joining us today. We are going to introduce a new word in the gaming vocabulary, that is Gollywood. The panel discussion is on introducing Gollywood, and it will be moderated by Mr. Rajan Navani, President, IDGS, and Vice Chairman and Managing Director, Jetline Group of Companies. Our esteemed panelists for the session are Mr. Ed Mills, CEO, Hero Digital Entertainment, LA, Mr. Michael P. Nash, founder, Beverly Hills Productions, and Mr. Sheldon F. Robbins, CEO, Upper Love Incorporation. With this, I would now like to invite Mr. Rajan Navani to kindly take the panel discussion forward. Over to you, Mr. Navani.
Thanks, Payal, and a very good morning to everyone here in India. A very good evening, actually, to everyone in the US. Good afternoon to many of my friends who are joining us from the rest of Asia. So yeah, we are coming to the last day of a 2-week long conference. We've covered tons of subjects, and one of the things we wanted to do is to leave the gaming industry, not only in India, but globally, with the thought of introducing a new term called Gollywood, a G as in for gaming. And we thought that today's discussion could be one that could focus around what could be the meaning of the word Gollywood as we move forward. As Indian Digital Gaming Society, India Gaming Show, things we've been doing over the past 6 years, particularly seeing the emergence of gaming in a country like India and now playing catch up to a global industry that is, at a value of over 160 to 170 billion dollars in revenue, which we put together is more than the entire movie and music industry combined. We felt that the time has come when we really don't look at things regionally. It's not that the LA of Hollywood or the Mumbai of Bollywood are the drivers of entertainment, but the G of global, the G of gaming, the G of Gollywood. So global gaming industry really being the next frontier of entertainment in the world. I think that is the word that we wanted to introduce today. That is the discussion that we are going to have today, the different aspects, nuances of that. And really, do we see a world of entertainment, say 5 years from today, when Gollywood is actually as generic a word, if not more, than what we understand when we think of Hollywood and Bollywood today. With that, I want to welcome 3 very interesting participants for us who represent the Hollywood side. Yesterday we did discuss the impact of Bollywood in the gaming industry in India. While we did have, an interaction with Hollywood a little bit yesterday as well, I think today's discussion is with three very eminent people from the Hollywood industry. Ed Mills. Ed is, the CEO of Hero Digital Entertainment, a veteran in gaming. Started BitSense and then through Hero Digital Entertainment, done a lot with gaming and Hollywood and the industry combined. And we have two very interesting people in Mike Nash, who's a writer, director, producer, who was voted as the top 10 movie maker of the planet about a decade ago and founded Beverly Hills Productions. So someone who really understands storytelling content in a very different manner. And Sheldon Robbins, who's the president and CEO of Upper Lab, where he is actually responsible for the corporation's film operations right from development to release. So, really having an entire understanding of the movie industry, the gaming industry. We've often talked of gaming being used either as a marketing tool, as an afterthought, or gaming being as a means of engagement with audiences, with a very small allocated budget when it comes to films. But I think the fact that the next generation, the new gen that is engaged, the pandemic has accelerated a lot of that on gaming, on mobile, with esports, entertainment being viewed around gaming, publishers. I think there is a lot happening that positions gaming to stake its claim to Bollywood today. So with that, I'm going to, open this discussion up, and maybe I would like to invite Ed first to share your thoughts. Ed, do you really think Bollywood is something that is worth discussing? Is it something that you see happening? Is it something that you feel is a little further away from us? Your thoughts?
Thanks, Rajan, and for inviting us for this Friday morning session. It's not too late here in LA, so we're happy to be here today. I would say in the past, when we did Passengers, for example, with Sony Pictures and Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt, that film was shot. It was a Hollywood big budget film. They wanted to make a game. We came in after the fact, and we were so limited on what we could do with that game. We couldn't shoot new scenes. We couldn't play with these robots. They were so fascinating. We didn't really have the footage we wanted. The story couldn't be told. So Gollywood, for me, is that next step where you are combining gaming and you're combining Hollywood or Bollywood together. And to be successful, in my opinion, you have to have them both going on at the same time, from basically some creation point to the final product. Having the writers and the filmmakers and the game makers all in the same room is just going to exponentially make the game more successful. And it's interesting that no one thinks of games as being that big a deal. And when you're in Hollywood, we're outperforming them, $1 billion last year. So somebody's got to take notice. I think, Rajan, you picked a great word that we could gravitate towards and try to get those filmmakers. And that's why the two people we invited here are filmmakers, and they understand the gaming mechanism and how important it is. So in closing, great idea. Gollywood, go.
Thanks, Ed. Mike, your opening thoughts on this subject. Mike, you're on mute. Sorry, can you just unmute?
Rajan, again, thank you for having me. Good morning, India. This is for myself as a storyteller, as someone who has spent the last 25 years in narrative. I think the timing is right for a word to exist, even like Gollywood. And I mean, if I kind of go back to the beginning of, when I first came to Hollywood, you have creative people that, always thought that kind of technology was something out there, and technology could never really enhance our own creativity and the stories that we want to tell. And then a couple decades ago, we started seeing where technology started to fit with all of this, but many filmmakers and a lot of folks within Hollywood still were kind of hesitant. There were some early adopters like Cameron and stuff like that, but today I think we're in a space where, for the first time, literally in humankind, where technology can take our imagination to a point where we have never even thought possible. And so understanding the merging of both of these, from a cinematic television standpoint to a gaming standpoint, I think the time is now for Gollywood. And I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to hear what everybody has to say, and I'm happy to participate, and see if I can bring any guidance or vision to this new platform that is emerging today.
Thanks, Mike. I think we'll come back to you on specific thoughts on how we see this entire space shaping up. Sheldon, your opening thoughts on this subject, and given your experience with films and with games in the past.
Well, first, I'd like to thank you, Rajan, for the invite. I'm actually, my company is based in LA, but I'm currently in Vancouver, which Vancouver is becoming what we call the Hollywood North, Vancouver, Canada. So that being said, when I first saw your email of the term, I was like, man, I like it. It's a great idea. It's just G for go, right? And especially, just to add to what Michael and Ed has said, when I first studied film, I got into film. I studied film first to where I got a master's degree. And then from that, I then started to learn more so just hands-on. And to divert from that a bit, I started to create stuff within the influencer space because I saw how mobile content was taking off. And a good friend of mine, Will Smith, he was like, Sheldon, whatever you do, just keep creating content, because when he went to do film in Asia, he was like, right now the Asian market they're putting out everything on devices, on mobile phones, and he's like, just keep making content because content is king. Fast forward to now, where we see this pandemic, and you see the use of how everyone has taken that content. I mean, how content is being curated, and it's like, you're out of, so many people are streaming, so many people are, whether it's on the phones, whether it's on your tablet, and you're seeing what's happening. Then you see the synergies with the gaming and like even with music and concerts and all, and you look at it from you have to step back and like, whoa, and you look at it and you think to yourself, you're like, wow, okay, this thing is going to change and it's going to explode. So somebody's got to be in the front of this. So when I see your term come across of Gollywood, I was like, okay, John is onto something as well. So, again, as we could delve more into my thoughts on all of this, but I could just tell you it's an exciting time right now. It's a very, very exciting time for what's happening with film, with television, with streaming, with games, with it all. So I'm really excited to be in this conversation and see what everyone has to say.
No, thanks, Sheldon. Sheldon, you mentioned earlier in our chat, leading up to this conversation, that you had a great background in dancing, right? And how that has been a key part of entertainment, and a lot of things going on. We were talking yesterday to Tommy Zararko, who's done a lot with music for over 25 years. And when we are creating games, which are also based on, say, movies or movie IPs, I think if you don't have, and he demonstrated, in a Bond game, the Bond music, or you don't have, the critical elements of that film, whether it be music or like in Bollywood, it's a lot about dance, steps, music, right? It is not the same experience, right? Now, this is when we are looking at gaming as derived from movies, right? So how do you see that? The importance of that, and how can we make it happen, right? How, Ed put a good point, right? The best way to do it is to include gaming at the same point when the movie is being created, right? And both go hand in hand to get the best outcome in the game. So you have any thoughts on how?
Oh, boy, I have a lot to say on that. So, Ed's been a beautiful relationship for me, and I'll tell you why. Because I came to Ed years ago with a film concept and understanding his gaming side. And I was like, Ed, you know, I want to make this game so we could do it after I do the film, I could do this gaming. And then he was telling me, he's like, Sheldon, look, it's a heavier climb for us. You know, of course, he's speaking from experience. It was a heavier climb for us to do it after you've done the film. So then now, fast forward to 2-3 years later, and I'm in conversations with Digital Domain, you know, the guys that do Marvel, and they have created, you know, every event or every VFX that you've seen for all of the Marvel franchises. And I'm picking these guys' brain because I'm having them work with me on a project. And honestly, it's the stuff that Ed had told me from way back is now coming to fruition for me, because these guys are like, we need to know to move left and right, and what your script is and how that's going to move and how this is. And so now seeing how it's all coming together in that regards, and how, especially how the world has changed, I could tell you it works better if you start to create all of that at the same time, so that you could now say, okay, I'm going to export this to this film. I mean, to this platform here. We're going to do the game like this, and it correlates with what your VFX is here, and how you plan on shooting this here, and your camera movement there. So to add to just to answer what you're saying, it's very important to put these elements, all of this creative, in one room at the same time and build at the same time. So you're building this platform, and it's just kind of like you're borrowing this from here and putting it over there as you move forward, because it just makes the process that much more easier.
Yeah, no, thanks for those comments, and I completely agree, you know, with what you're saying. And see, I think it's therefore we feel, you know, from a timing perspective, right? This is absolutely the right time, because the number of people who are deriving, or the amount of time spent, you know, on a game vis-a-vis when you watch a film, or you know, watch some content, you watch it and you're done, right? And here is, you know, people keep coming back to it, you know, regularly, taking that story and deepening, you know, the impact of that content and story. And you know, maybe Mike, that gets me to you, because you know, you've been like the, you know, the king of content, right? I mean, for so many years, and that's something that you work with, right? When people consume content, you know, in whichever shape and form, you know, especially when they have done that, you know, as movies, etc., in the past, and now with gaming, it's still content, you know. So how do you see consumption of content changing? You know, some thoughts around, you know, what could that mean, you know, for the entertainment industry moving forward?
Well, I think anybody that is in the space of gaming or film or television, we're all in kind of the same space of what I, you know, call the attention economy. We're all kind of fighting to figure out the best ways to captivate people for the longest amount of time. And you know, if you look back at the kind of the merging of gaming and film, a lot of it has been very, very successful and done very, very, very well. But there's always been a challenge from a story standpoint in porting an interactive IP to a non-interactive medium. And so when you start really trying to understand the best ways to kind of map that out, to outline that from the very beginning. I mean, I can tell you, Ed and I have worked on, I had just finished this movie recently that, Ed, I mean, we've been talking about for years. And the reason that I spoke to Ed about it was it's, you know, when you look at most games, they are told through the perspective of the player. And when you look at most movies, they are told through the perspective of a viewer. You know, I mean, there's a protagonist, but your engagement within the platform is from a viewer standpoint, very different than a gaming standpoint. So when you really start merging these two kind of avenues, you have to really take all of that into consideration. And so this serial killer vigilante film that I created last year is literally shot from the POV of the protagonist, and that opened up a lot of opportunities for gaming. And so Ed and I have been talking about this quite a bit on where we could go with this, cool things that we could do. maybe in the movie, where then when you put it on a digital platform, the player would then be able to open up a door that was never opened up in the movie and go deeper into the story than had ever been told before. Okay. Now, if I give Ed the movie after I've shot it and we've never had those conversations, those really interesting things that I think users would appreciate just really aren't going to happen. So I think, I think the merging of both of these is key from the very beginning of figuring out what you're going to tell and how you're going to do it. I can tell you just from experience with what Ed and I did, it certainly helped out. It helped me out as a filmmaker too, to understand different avenues, to maybe take this story down.
I think you bring out a very, very good point, that the view or the lens of a viewer and the lens of a gamer are definitely different. And therefore, we find when we look back on the history of, Hollywood and gaming, or Bollywood and gaming, at Jet Synthesis in India, we worked with pretty much, every single large leading celebrity, from Amitabh Bachchan to Salman Khan to, Priyanka Chopra. We've discussed with many of them on what games could be. We've created games on movies. Ed's been part of some discussions also, earlier. And one thing that we found that, never worked was just taking a great game, or, taking some genre of a game that's working and then slapping a movie IP on top of it, and then hoping that it will create a phenomenal, change, right? I think that historical narrative, or that attempt that we see, really hasn't paid off, right? So I think the only way is to therefore look at it as, from two different lenses, but at the same time kind of merge them together, right? And with that, I'm actually going to move to Ed, because, Ed, while Mike and Sheldon both, come more from the filmmaking side, historically, you've been, a gaming guy for a long time, right? I mean, not historically, I mean, for the last decade or so with HitSense, with, working with, celebrities there, and then, moving from the Midwest to LA to really strengthen this entire concept of gaming in Hollywood. So, what have been your learnings, right, from your, early days in gaming to where we are today? How do you see the same issue that Mike has talked about?
I think it's a good point, Rajan. I think when I look back at the last 7 or 8 years, we've been lucky enough to have 7 #1 games with many, whether it was Tom Hanks, Billy Crystal, some of the well-known people, Godfather with Paramount. Those products had an IP that everybody knows who Amitabh Bachchan is, right? So you put that name on the product, and you're going to get the downloads, you're going to get the eyeballs, people are going to want to watch it. People that pitched, soap commercials from 30, 40 years ago because they're a famous actor or whatever product they're selling. So we know the brand helps the product push forward, and all you gamers out there that is making a product right now, you know how hard it is to be seen. So what we found out is we can be seen with this IP, but can we make money? I think Rajan's point is we absolutely cannot slap a face on a game and think it's going to make money. It happened one time with Kim Kardashian, and that was 8 years ago, I'm guessing. And everybody tried to replicate it ever since. The products that you really started from the core beginning with the movie, with the game, with the IP, whether it's a movie, a TV series, or an actor, whether it's Snoop Dogg or Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather loved to gamble. But we found out, why make a boxing game? We make a gambling game. It's very successful. So finding that passion that the IP has, whether the IP holder, whether it's Paramount or Sony, or if it's the actual artist, that's the trick that Gollywood is trying to unlock. And moving forward, we can connect you with any celebrity in the world. You can reach out to us. You have a great idea. We can pitch these ideas. I think you got to look at the vision that Mike talked about, is building it all together from ground up having people that all have buy-in, and that's your best chance to be seen and your best chance to have success, and a model that actually makes money, right? It's not all about getting 1 million downloads. Passengers had it, like they had 18 million downloads, but it didn't make money because people didn't really need to pay for content they didn't already see.
No, that brings us to a good point, right? How have people traditionally made money, in Hollywood and Bollywood, and how will it be different if we were to bring Gollywood in, right? So Mike, maybe you and then Sheldon can share some thoughts on that, on the models, by way of which, money is today being made, in in the areas of entertainment.
Yeah, for myself, I mean, I think look, the users, if you have a game that becomes a well-known IP and it becomes a brand, and vice versa, if you have a set of books or a film that becomes a success and it becomes a brand, users will fight for what they believe in. And so when you decide to take it into another realm, I would say the very first thing that you have to think about, besides joining forces at the very beginning, is understanding what the user really wants, regardless of what medium it's in. And so, when you start looking at other ancillary aspects, and there's certainly a lot of ancillary aspects, like in film, we use product integration and product placement all the time. In fact, it's one of the, quickest expanding sectors of film and television. And, I think when you can guarantee brands an ROI because you have celebrities within your space, or you're going to have influencers pushing, these products out, it helps everybody. And to kind of like what Ed was saying, so when you have this IP, or you have this influencer, this celebrity that is willing to get behind this app and push it out to his 70 million followers, that's incredibly attractive. But I would just share with you that you have to be very clear of what your users are going to be looking for, or you can lose them and screw up both sides of the IP or the brand.
No, I think it's interesting what you're saying, because eventually, we're seeing great games now making movies. Angry Birds is an example where you created a great IP in the gaming world, and then looking at films, and films creating great IPs, and then creating probably as successful or even more successful games, right? I think the cross section of that, and that, I think, together can become a great pool of monetization, and especially if one can bring products and brands in into both segments, and link that across that. I think it becomes even greater value for brands. And countries like India do rely a lot more on in-game advertising as a monetization tool, rather than in-app purchases, which is a lot more popular in the West and in other evolved gaming markets. So I think there's a lot that India can bring to the table when it comes to how do you create games that incorporate different brands, product placements. And you're saying today it's a growing area in terms of revenue, even in Hollywood, right? I think it could be something that one could deepen a discussion on. And maybe, I don't know, Sheldon, you have some thoughts on this subject?
You're on mute, Sheldon.
I said Mike is kind of hit it right on, hit the nail right on his head. One thing I would add to that is that, the way the world is now, I mean, everything, there's a cross section of everything, right? So that being said, I would say for a gamer that's making a new game or new game idea, I would say don't go in the traditional sense of thinking, okay, this is just a game that I'm making. I would say develop it out like, okay, I could make this as a TV series, I could make this as a film, I could make this as You know, it's instead of, you know, the old model was you make a game, or you're making a game from, you know, from, in at least in my world, you're making a game off of the IP of the film. But because now with, you know, the new celebrities are influencers, right? Celebrities are, you know, a person that's got a heavy engagement. So when you now change, as the model has changed, I would say to take that a new approach of saying, okay, you know what, I can make this as this, I can make it as a game, and then keep it open and keep it broad to where you could do a bunch of different things with it, because you just never know, you know, because of the way the world has changed, right? So instead of just saying, okay, I'm making a game, I'm just focused on making this game is going to take off. But now if you make, okay, if you wrote that game as a script for a movie, or as a you know, television show, as something to be streamed, and then of course you had the product placement and all that stuff that could easily be added into it, and you could probably influx influencers in that as well. But I would say that's the new approach, what I would add to it, to keep it broad, that you could do a bunch of different things instead of the old way of just making it an ancillary market item.
Yeah, you know,
I'll touch on that, Rajan, real quick if I could. I was going to just say that Sheldon and I are going to Dubai next week. So I feel like his Follow Me brand is very brand driven. And I think maybe Sheldon, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that with Rajan's question, but it just sort of comes to mind.
Oh yeah, definitely. So Raj, just kind of give you another background. So I created a like 4 years ago, and this was trial and error, right, to where I'm at now. So I took influencers, top influencers before, you know, everyone's doing TikTok all over the world, right? But before there was TikTok, TikTok was Musically. So I took the top, what they were called musers then. I took like, what, 8 kids, they had about, I would say, somewhere roughly about 50 million followers. And I started, and with my partnerships at Universal Studios as an independent filmmaker, I went into this to the park, and I shot all these little short episodes of these kids as influencers, right? Like I said, they're the new celebrity. Their engagement was so phenomenal that we put it on this platform called Clicks TV, where on that platform they had all celebrities. So there was like Arnold Schwarzenegger, there was LMFAO, a musician. There were, you know, all these Mark Wahlberg, who did a golfing thing, and their content didn't even do a smidget of the numbers that these kids who are nobodies that I took and put them together. I created the show, and I called the show Follow Me. Well, now we're creating, me and Ed are going to Dubai because we got a Follow Me platform, which again, from trial and error, seeing what worked and what didn't work, we're taking that platform, and the platform is going to have gaming, it's going to have, you know, film, it's going to have television, it's going to have sports, it's going to have everything you could think of in the influencer space, which is basically a new social media platform where we are adding all of these different elements into it based on how we're watching the world change, from the gaming to the influencers to the brands. You know, when we had these kids, brands, and I'm talking about studios are trying to promote their films, and they're calling these 13-year-old kids to come fly them to Universal and paint them handsomely because of the engagement that they had. So seeing how that has all changed, the Follow Me brand that I've created is infusing kind of what you're talking about, of how you kind of, you know, the market has changed, and we're putting it all in one pot and stirring it, and going to output it on this new platform called Follow Me, which is available in iOS and Android as we speak.
No, very interesting, because you know, I think the young kids, right? They have audiences again who look at them as the idols, because they connect, you know, generationally, right, with those influencers, and make decisions and choices which brands, you know, look for, because their idols are not necessarily, you know, the movie celebrities, or you know, those who have probably grown up in a different era, right? And we see that, in fact, particularly even in a country like India, right, which is a very young country. I mean, in India, you know, 1 in 10 people in the world is an Indian under 25, right? I mean, just think of that statistic, right? It's not only an Indian, but it's an Indian under 25. So a country which has so many young people, you know, the opportunity again for influencers to create an impact on their choices. And, the ability, for them to just view content, becomes big. And, to Mike's, your earlier point of the difference between a viewer and a gamer, I think with esport, kind of taking off in a huge way, particularly, in the pandemic, and, we co-founded India's largest esports company. And I can tell you, we've seen massive growth, right, in this period, in the pandemic. The viewers of esport, right, are again today running into tens and hundreds of millions of people. Now that, again, demographic profile is one of a viewer. It's a young viewer who's consuming, esport entertainment, as well as, the content that Sheldon's talking about, right? So I think the convergence, of that viewer, and after viewing, he wants to become a better gamer. I'm just taking that point, right? How do we center the Gollywood industry around a demographic rather than a geographic location, right? It's not about English, and it's not about, LA, it's not about Hindi and dancing and Bollywood in Mumbai. It is around that, 13-year-old, a 16-year-old, or whatever we want to decide, who is viewing, who is gaming, whose world is around that. And I think Sheldon brought a great point out that if a project is started right away with all the aspects of entertainment, right? Whether it is a TV show, whether it's a movie. So, and bringing different concepts of that to a universe and really, letting that happen simultaneously rather than, let's get one done. Of course, everything changes, right? In terms of the allocation of budgets, etc. But the idea is, I think as a world, we are probably ready for something like that, and I don't know whether that could, kickstart, what we're talking in terms of Hollywood. But Mike, I don't know, Sheldon, a little more before I move back to Mike. Yeah.
I think, look, I think what Sheldon said was spot on, and that's why this is so interesting, because if you kind of take a step back, we're all in this together. It's all about entertainment. And when I go to a brand here and I tell them about, this project or that project, if I also can tell them that I have an influencer that's going to be on set, that's going to be pushing content out to 15 or 20 million people, and oh, by the way, they'll be drinking your water bottle when they're doing that. And then I can let them know that, I have a partnership with a company in India that's building, a game around this. And in fact, we're in this business together. We came together to kind of create this new IP together. There's more opportunity. There's more ancillary aspects of it. And so, I think over the last several decades, there's been some people that have been successful. A lot of people have not been successful trying to do this, but I think the time is now. I think for the first time, the unity between both the gaming community and the entertainment community can be seamless if we really come together and work together on all this. I also think that, look, everybody in Hollywood wants to expand, into, Asia and the East. So we're all about that. I mean, I would also say that, there's groups here there's a group that's called Queens, and they're female gamers, and they have some of the best female gamers in the world that have kind of gotten together to, build their force and create. And they came to me to see, if I would be open to creating some content for them and some IP for them, which then they could either create, television shows or movies or gaming or all together within this. But, Rajan, I think when Ed called me and kind of told me about all of this, there's nothing like having passion and a great idea, but you're early to the dance, and I think the timing for all of this is now. So I would just say that anybody's that is watching this in India, we're totally open to this in Hollywood. Like, we would love to figure out ways to create more bridges between, our territories and widen our scope in hopes of, captivating all of this seamlessly.
No, yeah, I think that's, that's again a great, point that we can keep discussing. How do we bring, Hollywood and Bollywood and entertainment in India and US, to do a lot more together. Where is that crossover? Is it only in movies? Is it in gaming? Is it in music? Is it in dancing? I mean, there's so many, areas around which, that can happen. And I think enough hasn't been done there either, right? Ed, you've spent time, right? You came to Mumbai, you've been back to Hollywood, in for the past few years, and I'm sure others have too. What do you see? How does one grow the India, US, Hollywood, Bollywood connect and deepen that between the two countries?
I think it's a great question, Rajan. I don't know if people are going to like my answer, but it's going to have to come down to, I will call it, most people I work with in India, Rajan has, Michael has a project with an India group. Sheldon has a project with India group. I have many other people that come to me and they have an India group, and it tends to always be the same thing. It's a work for hire situation. And if you're in that work for hire situation, you have to get the product done as inexpensively and as quickly as possible from a expense side, right? So I feel like somebody in India, whoever that may be, people with more money than what most people have, want to invest in these studios to invest in new IP. So if I want to do a partnership with the next Mission Impossible that's coming out with Tom Cruise in a couple of years, they're filming both movies. There's a studio there that can come along with the ride, and the investment is making money when the project goes live. So it's going to be a huge shift from how everybody feels now. I feel like HitSense is more into that space where all the work's done in-house. To get the terms that you want with the studios, you got to get them excited, and it normally comes without a paycheck. It becomes with risk, but the risk and reward, there's the offset, because we're talking about 70% of the revenue when the studio is getting 18%, right? I think the conversation needs to be, can we risk half a dozen of our team members to work on this project for 2 years, knowing that it may not make the kind of money we want, but to get the terms that we want in Hollywood, and I'm assuming in Bollywood is very, very similar. But right now, they don't want to write checks. They think we should write them a check, right? You got to pay the celebrity the money, the IP, right? So I think it's a total different way of thinking to really bring this Gollywood idea to where it needs to be. It's got to be, a higher up group of people, whoever that may be, that's willing to step up and support these great studios that do great work there. I've met a lot of them, including yours, Roger.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with you. I think if you look at the industry at large, a large part of the engagement with Hollywood from India is supporting Hollywood films, supporting the Hollywood industry more as they work for hire and that kind of stuff. Whereas the investments into Hollywood IPs, have been few and rare. There have been instances, but I think again it comes down to return on investment, on the risk appetite that companies are willing to take.
Yeah.
And I think therefore the bet on something like Gollywood, right? Because if gaming becomes an integral part of that entire piece, right, then I think there is an area or a revenue stream that is a little different from just the reliance on film and a pandemic kind of a situation, right, where we saw productions go down, people not being able to go to theaters. Of course, there is an emergence of online OTT, which has increased significantly, but it has come at at the cost of physical entertainment, not being there. Whereas when it comes to gaming, there was no physical to begin with, right? So I think
Yeah.
it's kind of, stood out, right, in terms of what has it, what it brings to the industry. So it's interesting, that the ability for true spirit, joint investments into products and IPs is really what, I think can drive a lot of this industry, going forward. I know Sheldon, Ed said you also had some experiences, with India, but further to just bringing IPs and doing things together, I think there's an opportunity for India, US to do things for the world, right? I mean, if you see Hollywood movies, they've gone global, right? I mean, there will be no country in the world where, very few countries in the world where Hollywood movies do not reach. The same is not true with Bollywood, right? Because while Bollywood is largely India dominated, there are a few places where it does. Any thoughts on how, how do you take your films, your distribution, what you do to release globally? Is there anything there that can be done when we look at the new Bollywood, in that sense?
Yeah, well, first let me go back a bit, just to touch on what both you and Ed just spoke on. I think India, and it's going to be epiphany where India has to realize its value. And I say that with all due respect because, when we put together a film, we start to think of the distribution. And of course, India and China, that's where you want, because there's so many people. So you want the industry looks at India and China with, with Google eyes, like, we want the product to go there, right? And so then going back to what you guys were just talking about, if you look at India's value from a studio perspective, from a distribution perspective, if India was to realize their value as, hey, we just don't want to be a work for hire, and we want to now start owning some stake in some of these projects, if you're bringing it across for distribution. So when they start to have those conversations with studios for the distribution aspect, they're like, look, we'll do the gaming stuff for this IP, but we're taking stake in the game. And like going back to what Ed was saying, that if India had that stake in the game where they're now engaged because they have ownership, that changes the game. Because one, from the US side, we need India for the distribution side, and India now is saying, hey, look, you bring these projects across, you bring this IP across. If we own stake in the game, now we could give you X, Y, and Z in gaming that we can now also build out once you start to build that IP out. That changes it all. Because I mean, if you look at what's happening right now, we're in a time where everything is changing to where people are starting to realize, okay, well, when pandemic hit, what is everyone doing? Everyone is streaming. Well, India right now is big on technology in India is huge. And of course, yes, and of course the price point that you're paying for tech in India is not the same price point you're paying in the US. So if India realizes its value and its worth in entertainment, I feel that changes the game right there. Just step back and say, hey, look, we realize our value. We don't want to just be a work for hire anymore. We want to have stake in the game, and we're going to change the narrative some to where now you've just created a whole new workforce, because like Ed said, if you guys was to put some stake in the game, it changes the narrative all worldwide. And that's what I'm seeing in that.
No, you're absolutely right, Sheldon. So we, again, when we looked at gaming and we invested, alongside, other gaming companies, in the US, and of course, Ed's a great example with whom we've invested. What happens is, at the end of the day, it gets limited again to the gaming universe, right? So I think what you're bringing out a point is that can then lead to many other things, right? It also has distribution angle, it has other aspects of India, that come together. And a true investment, right, of a large IP, and making real this entire vision or the dream that we've been talking about Hollywood only then, right, I think, the ultimate potential of this, bridge or partnership can get resolved, because it can bring in creative elements, it can bring in technology elements that you rightly said, distribution elements, and audience, kind of choices, because countries like India and China, what you rightly say, have 1 billion plus people, right? And their tastes, their choices are very different from what might be right or true. So even if you have a great piece of content, it's not only the language and the vernacular piece, right? We have a music side to our business as well, and we release songs in regional content, right, in certain states, Bihar, and these are states which have large number of people, but relatively, Haryana, where the local language is what drives, the engagement with music, and we get 100 million views, 150 million views in a matter of a few days, even in those markets today, right, on YouTube. So it's not that there is no hunger to consume content. It's there. It's about bringing that content and distributing it in the right format to those audiences, right? And I think, therefore, this holistic approach is probably what can, set a lot of this apart, right? As what you're saying. And, it also brings me to a subject, which has been the conversation of this entire 2 week, conference and show, which is gaming for good, right? I think the other G, the word that why G seems pretty relevant besides gaming global is good, right? And how do we really make gaming for good true come around, through Bollywood, right? And when we thought of gaming, in its true sense, and we put the theme, there were a few angles to it, right? One angle was, how do we use gaming in areas like education and others, or training and skill development, because people are reskilling, they have to, in the light of so many changes happening, the future of work is changing. How do you use gamification and gaming in that? How do you use gaming in a manner where people develop skill sets and become professional athletes? With esport now becoming an Olympic sport, and it will become soon. It's already an Asian Games sport. How do we look at define gaming from the gamer side? Because in countries like India, there are states or governments that are now banning certain types of gaming formats like fantasy sports, or real money gaming, where you're putting money in and taking money out. So what does gaming for good really stand for? And can Bollywood really stand for entertainment for good, or content for good? I know, Mike, you've done a lot in that space. Maybe you can share some thoughts of your experiences of how you have looked at the word good in content.
Thank you. I've been involved in creating content, content for good, and we kind of call it, it's either E squared, or it's where entertainment and education kind of commingle, edutainment, if you will. In fact, I spent some time in Bollywood and in Mumbai with a group out of Hollywood, where we brought in a lot of, professional storytellers and just educated them on the importance of creating storylines within primetime television shows and movies, that help just us all live in a better world, whether that's, women's rights, or overfishing the oceans, or whatever that may be. Whenever you have an opportunity to kind of awaken, certain parts of the world, I would say go for it. Now, these also have to be entertaining, especially if you're going to be, having kids play these, and so it is a fragile kind of understanding of where you go and how you do that. But I can tell you, Beverly Hills Productions has spent many years pushing content to the United Nations, whether it's Leonardo DiCaprio's films on climate, and once we kind of get them, we help with the distribution aspect of it. The United Nations is showing these to prime ministers and to presidents, like literally the people that are making the decisions that run our world. This content is getting in front of, and so there is an unbelievable opportunity to create content for good. I'll tell you a little side story that I on another time that I went to India. I went up to Punjab, And this is what I would tell you you shouldn't do in India, but it's somewhat of a comical story. A friend of mine that lived in Punjab had asked me, he goes, I have an animation company there. They'd love to, they heard that Beverly Hills Productions was going there. They'd love to, meet with you. And I'm like, yeah, I'd be happy to meet with them. So it's set up where I'm in my hotel. I go down to the lobby. They're going to pick me up at 10 o'clock. This car comes. I jump in the car. I go to this animation studio, and they could not have been kinder. They had created all this really cool, animation of me flying around with a camera and stuff. And I'm there for like 4 or 5 hours, and I get back to the hotel, and there's police everywhere. And I get out, and my friend's like, "My God, where have you been?" And I'm like, "Oh, these guys really took me on a great tour." He goes, "Which guys?" And the car that dropped me off took off. They had kidnapped me. They were another animation company that wanted to kind of have the opportunity to talk to someone in Los Angeles, and they were great. I mean, they could not have been cooler people. So, someday I hope to work with them too, but there's perhaps better ways to go about doing it. But I thought
you got kidnapped by somebody else, right? So,
by another animation company.
oh
And
my
the other
God.
animation company that I was supposed to work with that day or spend the day with were, they were not happy. I spent the next day with them, but very funny story.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think there'll be so many interesting anecdotes, when you try and explore opportunities, right, between two countries, because there are cultural aspects, there's understanding, and it also shows the hunger, right, to want to work, with studios in Hollywood, and I think that's also a little nature of the industry, particularly, right? I think it's and both Hollywood and Bollywood are so strongly built on aspirations of people, it ultimately comes, from there. I don't know, Ed, you have another good story, because we'll need to wrap up, but maybe we get one good story from you and a good story from Sheldon. Maybe that's a great way to wrap this up.
Like a good idea. I'll give my Amitabh story. We went to his house to talk about the making him in the Godfather game. And on the table is this sword that was given to him, like a samurai sword. I don't remember the where it came from. It was from Indian, something like 3,000 years old. I mean, you were there, Rajan, but this thing is encased in this uh, literally oxygen-free tank. And he just got it, and we were admiring it. And he goes, "Well, let's get it out and play with it." And I'm like, "Oh my God!" I feel like I was in the museum here. And I said, "You're not supposed to touch." There's a sign, "Do not touch." He opened this thing up, takes the tape off of it, pulls this thing up, and he is wheeling this sword around. And I'm literally terrified. But it just shows like somebody with that, he's bigger than life, right? And for him to act that way, I felt like I was in a movie at that moment with a very, very happy ending. Because I mean, there was smiles on all our face, and he put it back where it belonged, and it was perfectly fine. But it was definitely a do not touch moment that I will never ever forget. And we walked across the street just to go to his other compound, and people just pulled over, jumped out of their car, and just started crying and crawling on the ground. I mean, I don't know what he caused the commotion, but I knew what a big deal he was at that exact moment. So it was a fun memory there in Mumbai.
Yeah, yeah. I think there are a lot of stories like that, for many people when it comes to, interacting with celebrities in India, because I think, the much larger than life image, and, the true adulation and admiration that they command is something which is very different, right, from any other part of the world. So, Sheldon, last word to you. We're your experience, or something that you want to share before we close this out.
Um, I'll share. Well, I won't. Let's see. There's not really a story that correlates to what we're talking about right now that I could really pull out. I mean, I've got a lot of engagement with celebrities and whatnot, but I'll tell you one thing that, just wrapping this up, that has kind of reiterated in my brain is the word engagement. And that word right now, the way the world of entertainment has gone, it's funny because like Ed gets calls from the record labels saying, "Hey, Ed, we need you to make this because these artists need to, they want to do something virtual." And then you add that with streaming, and then you add that with gaming, and then you add that with all of the entertainment that, all the theaters are closed, so all movies are being distributed digitally, right? But then you add the influencers in it, and you're seeing a lot of influencers in movies now. And why are they getting these roles now? Because of their engagement. It all goes back to engagement. So the word engagement, which is what I would like to close with, is something that I would tell everyone watching, is to, you could have a simple concept and put it with the right people, all because of their engagement, and it could literally change your life. Whether it's a new Bollywood film, whether it's a new it's a new game, it's a new digital means. The word engagement, just remember that always. And that's what I've been like so keen with now, just watching the engagement, because I could care less if you got 1 million, 3 million, 5, 10 million followers, because everyone could buy those likes and buy those numbers. But I'm watching your engagement, and that's how I created my Follow Me platform, is off of these kids. They would just engage, and they were just doing simple stuff of just talking on the phone or being themselves, but the engagement of how they engage their audience has changed the way that the entertainment game is going now. So that word engagement is key for me right now.
No, and it's such a lovely point, because engagement requires so many things to fall in place, right? And we probably talked about the right kind of content for the right audience, the right kind of technology that can enable people to engage. But at the end, at the core of that is the trust you build with your viewer or gamer, right? Ultimate long-term engagement, the underlying thing is trust. And I feel, when it comes to working across countries, to what the story that Mike talked about, or the experiences, I think we got to build, if we have to build Hollywood, for the future, we have to build it on all of these pillars, that we've talked about so far. But, the trust, or the ability to build trust in stories, the ability to build it in the way we engage. And I think the future is going to have a lot more complications, right? Because we are going to have to deal with data, private data of people, and there are so many other challenges that will come in a purely digital-led world, where the world seems to be moving. And really, how do we strengthen and build that is something that, is truly exciting. And I want to really thank each of you. We talked of the attention economy of our viewers and gamers, but I think I'm sure we've had a very attentive audience, given the kind of content that all three of you have been able to generate in this past hour. I mean, an hour has gone by and we could keep talking, but the subject is exciting. And thank you everyone. Thanks Ed, thanks Mike, and thanks Sheldon for joining us here, and taking time out at a relatively odd hour from where you all are. But I think we look forward to deeper engagement on Bollywood as we move forward. So once again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you guys as well.
Thank you
Everybody
so
be
much,
safe.
Mr. Navani. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Sheldon, for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to have you all here on board. Thank you once again. And with this, we come to the end of this session, and we'll start with our next session at 3 p.m. So would request the participants to stay tuned and do come back at 3 p.m. today. Thank you so much, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.